Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. Hope you enjoy. The Planet Still Burns, written by H2J 1977. Hey, Kef, come over here and tell my new friend Thick about the humans. Boyd pulled out a stool between himself and his new Yelgari acquaintance. Kef and Boyd were both headlocks and still somewhat new to the asteroid mining camp. They spend most of their days off at the Rockbreaker, the only place for R&R on the asteroid. The bar could barely qualify as such, in truth. There was a physical bar, stools, a few impoverished tables, and a mismatch of chairs. There was a music box, but it was broken for the third time this cycle. The Grembek's bartender, Derivan, casually cleaned glasses, the bar top, and scanned the room for customers needing something. His younger sister was supposed to be the waitress tonight, but she had messaged him just before opening that she would be out tonight, supposedly sick. He knew that she was most likely with her new boyfriend, one of the shift leaders, another Grembek's, and a decent guy from everything he'd seen and heard. Not that it helped him handle his patrons. Derivan had heard humans before from a few other miners over the years. They seemed like the stuff of legend and hearsay. Feats of heroism, warmongering, shrewd negotiations, and prone to wide variety of quirks. But the one thing he did know for a fact was that they had invented the wormhole drive and connected a huge portion of the galaxy through commerce and politics, but not this sector of space, yet. Derivan passively watched as the second headlocks took the seat offered to him by his friend. He decided that he would listen in on the story while he worked. The bar was otherwise empty for the moment, so he figured he may as well keep himself entertained. Kef extended his six-fingered hand to shake the Yalgari's hand that was covered in green scales and attached to an arm that was covered with fine, almost hair-like feathers that ended at the wrist. The handshake had become a universal greeting amongst the races who interacted with humans or even just human-associated species. "I am Kef, greetings." Thig returned the handshake, taking care not to scratch Kef's hand with his thumb claw. "Boyd tells me you interacted with humans directly, that you were on Jitova Minor where it burned. If you don't mind retelling it, please enlighten me. I was still a fledgling school where that happened, but I can't imagine that you were much older." Derivan's interest was piqued at this point, his gazelle-like ears twitching before turning towards the conversation to better hear it. The Jitova Minor cataclysm was probably 15 years ago. He'd heard that nearly the whole planet burned, and that over 1,000 beings died on the colony world in the disaster. He'd also heard that the humans were credited with rescuing most of the colonists. But I don't mind. I was lucky. My whole family got off the planet safely thanks to the humans. But I guess I should give you some more background first. Jitova Minor was a moon circling the gas giant Jitova Prime. My parents had relocated there just as the colony was founded, about 10 years before everything went to hell. It was rich in minerals, fuel gases, and had the biggest deposits of Drevo gems that had ever been discovered. It was a boom colony. Within 5 years, there were over 100,000 colonists staking claims, working for mining companies, or just homesteading somewhere far away from the rest of civilization. That number had grown to over 250,000 at the time of the incident. We didn't know it at the time, but the planet's topsoil had some strange composition to it. I don't remember exactly what it was, but there was something in the soil that did not like one of the chemicals used in processing the Drevo gems. The mining company did know, or at least found out long before the rest of us. All of the company officers on the planet that survived ended up going to prison over their part in the disaster. Clarion Mining Conglomerate was the company, based out of our homeworld, was Sawavi. Kef squinted and snorted, his concept for the carelessness on display. "But I hadn't heard that part before," Dick said, surprised. "I knew that there was something dangerous about the way they were processing the gemstones, but kept it a secret. I guess that's a story as old as industrialization, though. Profits before morality. That's the thing, Kev said. If they had just come clean up front, then it probably wouldn't have been an issue, because we could have taken proper precautions to prevent accidents and set up evacuation plans in case of an accident. It was the cover-up that was the real issue, and that's why the planetside director is still rotting in jail 15 years later. Kev looked at his empty drink and held it up to the bartender, asking for a refill. While Derivan mixed and poured the new drink, Kev continued, Anyway, about 10 years ago, the main Drevo processing plant had an accident and spilled over 1 million gallons of the chemical that gave the Drevo gems their unique luster. The soil itself chemically combusted, and the fire started spreading rapidly. If I recall, no one at the processing plant survived the fire because it burned so fast and hot that they just never stood a chance. Within hours, kilometers of soil were burning. Investigations later determined that if it weren't for the wind patterns that time of year, the whole colony would have burned within a day. Kev sipped his refilled drink, nodded to the bartender, and thought for a second before continuing. But you wanted to hear about the humans, so let me get to that part. Within a day, the fire had burned millions of acres of land, and not just burned, glassed. The fire was so hot it melted metal structures, caused rocks to explode from superheating the moisture trapped in them, and fused the silicates in the soil. We sent out distress calls on our communications network, but we were on the far side of Jachova Major, and it was blocking most of our signals. Fortunately, there was a human running a small outfitting company in the colony, and they had a QNet and a wormhole-drive-capable ship. They raced all planets, stating that they would get help from the human-aligned planets, the Galactic United Senate. We waited with the planet literally burning around us for a full day. The local government sent police out to collect the homesteaders, wildcatters, and anyone that wasn't living in the colony itself to streamline the rescue effort. Some beings, like the mining executives, had spacecraft with FTL drives. They were able to get off planet, but it would take them months before they reached civilized space. There was more than one violent encounter over getting onto those ships. Kev looked between Point and Thig for a moment, remembering one instance where a corporate shuttle was swarmed by panicked colonists. Over 100 beings died when that overloaded ship crashed moments after takeoff. He decided to leave that part out. On the second day, the fire had grown so big that they were creating their own wind currents, and that turned the flames back towards the colony. Around 1 in the afternoon planetary time, we got a message from a human businessman. Everyone needed to get to the colony as soon as possible, as the rescue ships would begin arriving in minutes. Kev looked at them both again and continued. True to his word, 5 minutes, the ships began appearing out of nowhere in the sky above the colony. At first, it was some smaller vessels, but then frigates and huge cargo haulers started appearing. Within an hour, the 1,000 ships had jumped in system. An advance party landed and met with the colony leaders and emergency services chiefs. As impressive as their response time and the sheer magnitude of it was the next thing they did that saved thousands of lives that otherwise would have been lost. Humans have a unique type of firefighters they call smoke jumpers. By the end of the second hour, hundreds of humans deployed in front of the approaching wildfire. They started digging trenches and spraying thousands of liters of some sort of flame retardant in several meter-wide bands. The really crazy thing is that they already knew this wouldn't really stop the fire. When the ground itself is a fuel source, how can you even stop that? But that wasn't their intention. They went out there putting themselves directly in the path of the flames just to slow it down long enough to get everyone evacuated. Derivan willed himself silent, despite wanting to lean in and ask questions. Humans were crazier than he'd even heard about. But they had jumped in to help a colony on the other side of the galaxy that they didn't even know at a moment's notice. That more than made up for their recklessness. Kev noticed Derivan was drawn in by his story, but didn't mind the extra attention. Some stories were worth sharing with anyone that would listen. While the smoke jumpers were fighting the incoming wall of fire, The smaller ships began ferrying the colonists up to the larger freighters and transport ships. Thousands of beings were being evacuated by the hour. The air became thick with smoke and toxic fume as the wildfire closed in on the colony. It got so bad that everyone was ordered to get into one of the emergency shelters or any building that had air scrubbers. The main hospital, a few of the corporate buildings, and the only reason those air scrubbers installed was because of the contractual obligations with their vendors. They weren't really needed by the Jatova miner. I remember being crowded into a mini company's logistics building with what seemed like an impossible amount of people for a relatively small area. Once we got to this point, the fires were starting to reach the farthest edges of the colony itself. Beings were all crammed together in little more than clothes on their backs in most cases, and everyone was getting hungry and thirsty. But the humans had come prepared, or had quickly orchestrated bringing supplies in once it was clear that people were losing access to the essentials. Pallet upon pallet of bottled water and emergency meals seemed to just materialize and then never run out. Their ability to organize all of this in the middle of a chaos was beyond anything I've ever seen before. While I was waiting to be evacuated, stories started bubbling up about several pockets of colonists that hadn't returned to the main colony compound when the evacuation order was given. Thig interjected, astonished. "Wait, you mean that there were all groups of colonists that just stayed behind, ignoring the evacuation order? I assume they were the main source of the casualties?" Kev snorted in the display of amusement. "You would think so. And by all rights, it would have made sense. Other beings wouldn't have poured resources into tracking down the colonists that disobeyed the evacuation order, or couldn't be reached by the police, or refused to leave their homes while facing imminent danger. But that's not the case for the humans. They just started sending ships out in search patterns. Apparently, riding out the storm is a common human behavior, so they didn't think anything of it. Within a few hours, nearly all of the unaccounted-for colonists had been located, and they're rescued or marked for pickup as soon as the shuttle was available." A brief cloud of sadness crossed Kep's expression. Not all of the rescues went off without incident, though. According to the articles that came out afterwards, we found out that 6 human-flown rescue shuttles didn't make it back. Some got caught up in the fires. Some crashed when their engines were clogged by the ash and debris. And one didn't make it out because the pilot succumbed to a heart attack trying to rescue a family that had gotten trapped in their home by fallen support beams. He was the only human to lose his life in the whole operation. Deravan finally slipped up and spoke out. "A heart attack? How does that happen with beings in the business of rescue operations?" Realizing what he'd done, he threw his hands up apologetically. "I'm sorry, didn't mean to interject, but I've just been fascinated with this whole story." Kev blinked a few times before realizing what the confusion was. "Oh, the human that died was elderly for their kind, in his 70s, I believe, and he wasn't in the business of rescue operations. He apparently was a retired factory worker. In fact, none of the humans were in the business of rescue operations. They were all civilians." Thig spoke up again. "Wait, you mean to say that civilians were pulling off this big rescue operation on their own? This wasn't a government or military mission?" Kev chuckled. "That is exactly right. Apparently natural disasters are a common thing on their home world, and many of the worlds they've colonized throughout the galaxy. So much so that there are quite a few unofficial rescue organizations dedicated to various types of disasters in different parts of their territory. It turns out that when the human merchant went back to the GUS space and asked for help, the government didn't really jump to the aid of the unaligned planet. Like any government, they needed to have emergency meetings, committees, emergency authorizations, emergency spending bills. The GUS is comprised of over 100 different races and at least as many different agendas. But the merchant just started reaching out to those private citizen organizations. I think I heard them referred to as the Redneck Navy or the Cajun Navy. It actually took the GOS over a week to get the first ship in system. By then, the fires had already claimed the colony and hundreds of millions of square kilometers of land. In fact, That planet is still burning to this day in some places, because every time they try and put it out, it just comes back again from some hidden pocket of soil that was still burning deep underground. Thig pulled out his comm device and tapped a couple buttons. Hey, Peter, sorry to bother you this later. I need you to work up some job postings for emergency services coordination and rescue operators. No one quit. No, there isn't something that I know about it. I just want to be proactive and mark the job postings to go over to the GOS QNet and specifically request humans. I know we can't technically do that, but do what you can. Maybe direct the postings to be prioritized for human worlds. It's a bit of a long story. I'll fill you in tomorrow before the board meeting. Thig deactivated his device and noticed the confused stares from him's new companions. Oh, didn't I properly introduce myself? I am Thigagal Squat, and the incoming director of mining operations. I like to come down to these recreation areas and get a feel for the crew and the overall personality of the job site before I actually take over the role. I hope that you won't hold my little mission against me. Tell you what, I'll put in a good word for you with your foreman. See if they can't get you some light-duty shifts as an apology. How does that sound? End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Caspar Arnholtz, Cam Maxwell, Parky, It's Difficult to Pronounce, Lord Azrakul, and Arcadian.